Hello everyone friends. Subscribe to our channel. Here you will find real stories from people's lives. Today you will hear the story of a terrible woman's lie. There is no such thing as a woman who is faithful to the end, with very few exceptions. Every man knows this, only one worries, the other puts up with it, and the third tries his best to ignore it. I lived with my wife for nearly 40 years. We got married when I was 20 and she was 19. I had all sorts of things. We fought and we made up, but I was sure that in all that time we never once betrayed each other. Agree? It is difficult to live so much time with a very beautiful woman and never once doubted her love and loyalty. Nevertheless, no matter where fate threw me, she was always there for me. We had two beautiful children, a son Paul and a daughter Katia. Now they are both grown-ups and have families and children of their own. I was sure that we were to grow old in peace and tranquility, surrounded by our favorite grandchildren. I am a doctor. I served in the army for 25 years, reached the rank of colonel in medical service and had been retired for 10 years. Well, retired is a strong word. To this day I still work in a private clinic. Truth hold a scalpel in his hands is not often. His age still takes its toll, but therapeutic reception lead. Nastia, that's my wife's name, also works, though in an advertising firm. She is a designer by training. To say that we were experiencing financial difficulties. No. We just worked for our own pleasure. I've been to a lot of places during my service. I was in Africa for almost a year, Mongolia, Vietnam. To tell the truth, I hardly ever saw these countries. My job as a doctor was almost round the clock, and certainly not as a soldier. Then came the hot spots, but every time I came home, I knew that my loving wife and children were waiting for me. At least I thought so. Alas, as it turned out, this was just wishful thinking. Despite her age, my wife managed to retain her natural beauty. She always took care of herself, which allowed her to maintain a maiden figure and face without a single wrinkle. When we walked side by side she was mistaken for my young mistress. The contrast was too stark, a young blonde and a gray-haired, mature man, daddy, with a young mistress. Nastia was very amused by this contrast, and it flattered me too, but, as it turned out, I was having fun for nothing. It all happened one rainy November evening. Have you ever noticed that the events that change our lives for the worse happen on rainy autumn evenings? It's as if dying nature is trying to drag us down with it. It was late fall. I sat at the kitchen table and went through my papers looking for my medical records. I had a checkup at the health center on Monday, and I needed to find my immunization card. Nastia was not at home. She had gone into town that afternoon to buy groceries and cook Sunday dinner for us. I spent a long time going through old documents, some certificates yellowed by time, and suddenly I found something that really shocked me. It was an extract from my wife's medical records. It was from a period when I had been away on a long business trip and had not been home for almost a year. It was 4 years after the birth of my daughter. The statement talked about pregnancy and premature birth of Nastia. Tests, results of ultrasound investigation. It turns out that Nastia had a premature 6-month-old baby at that time. After 3 days he died. Next came the tests on her and the baby. The baby was Rh negative and of the third blood type. I felt like a closet had collapsed on me at the very least. There was no way I could be the baby's father. Nastia and I are blood type and Rh positive. Our mutual child could not have these blood types, only type B and rhesus positive. And finally, the baby could not have been mine to begin with, because I simply was not in the country at the time. I stared blankly at the discharge form for a long time and could not put my scattered thoughts together. Nastia is not faithful to me. While I was away from home she managed to get pregnant and almost had a baby. But with whom? A half hour ago I was sure that I have a strong family, a loving wife and a cloudless future. Now there was only ruin behind my back. Finally I managed to pull myself together. I carefully put the certificate back and found a statement hidden in the briefcase. The most important thing is to calm down. Do not whip the fever. The fact that Nastia was cheating on me, it is a documented fact. Frankly, I had a desire to have a showdown immediately after the return of his wife, but I wanted to sort things out first. The kids. Here everything was clear. There was a 9-year difference between them. Both Pavel and Katya were blood typo. It was obvious that they were mine. They both looked like me when I was young, as much as children can look like their father. I had no doubt I was their father, but the thought didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't understand why she did this to me. We married for love. I spent almost a year courting her. Other women for me did not exist, although I had an attractive appearance and the attention of the opposite sex was not lacking. But for me all my life there was only one woman, my Nastia. Throughout our life together I tried to surround my wife with care and attention. Sometimes it seemed to me that I had no other single life. My wife was everything to me and more. And then this. My heart ached. I went out on the balcony for a breath of fresh air. Looking down, I saw in the light of a dimly lit street lamp, as a car stopped outside our doorway. After a while my wife jumped out of the car, followed by a man. He opened the back door and took out packages. Nastia quickly kissed him on the cheek, took the packages and went into the entryway. The man got in the driver's seat and the car slowly drove out of the yard. The lock of the front door clicked. "Yura, are you home?" My wife's voice sounded unexpectedly loud and I realized that I could not stand it and I would start an argument right now. Came to Marinka to talk about once upon a time. Nastia's voice expressed no emotion. Well, it's been a long time. Now I'll quickly prepare something. And why are you so sulky? She kissed my cheek and I heard a fresh smell of alcohol. Well, do not wrinkle. With Marinka had a little champagne. She wiped the lipstick off my cheek. So she was the one who gave you a ride. I tried my best to speak calmly. Nastia looked at me with an unfamiliar look. You could tell she did not know how to answer me. Yura, don't push it. I came in a cab, or rather an acquaintance drove me. My wife was feverishly searching for the right answer. What's the problem? Nothing. He must have been a very close acquaintance, if you kissed him goodbye. My heart was pounding so hard I thought even the neighbors could hear it. To occupy myself and to calm myself I got up and took out a full bottle of whiskey. Nastia looked at me frightened. And how do I know? I stood on the balcony and saw you say goodbye to the driver. It took a lot of effort to keep my composure and not turn to shouting. The kiss is the fare. Yura. What? Yura. I poured myself a whiskey. Sit down. I have some questions for you. I pulled out from under the table stool and took out of the diplomat ill-fated statement. Nastia, what is it? I put the document in front of my wife. She carefully turned a few pages and quickly pulled away her hand. Where is it from? Nastia raised her eyes to me, which began to fill with tears. Did you read it? Nastia, who were you pregnant with? What happened? I took the glass, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. She was silent for a while, and then she suddenly said in an unexpectedly calm voice, it was bound to happen someday, and maybe it's even good that it happened now. In an even, calm voice she told me that in my long absence, she had met a young man whom she had fallen in love with. He was 11 years younger. It was like an obsession. She couldn't help herself. At first she ran to him on dates, then she took the children to her mother's and he moved into our apartment with her. They started living like husband and wife. From the ethereal love sessions, she got pregnant and he proposed to her. To her, a married woman, the mother of my 2 children. In her love haze she even secretly hoped that I wouldn't come back at all and then everything would work itself out. They would get married and be together. The baby was born prematurely and died 3 days later. At this point, she burst into tears. My understanding was that she didn't care about the rest of the children. After the baby died, the relationship between them cooled and, she said, they became estranged from each other. Then a young woman appeared on the horizon and her lover left her for good, in pursuit of new adventures. After worrying for a while, Nastia took the children and waited for me. When I came back she met me as if nothing had happened. And all the next years, she diligently played the role of loving and caring wife. I was shocked. To be honest, I was unable to think or speak at all for a while. I was staring at the wall in silence and not a single thought entered my head. I was just staring at the same point. But that wasn't all. 6 months ago her heartfelt friend showed up in our town. Passion flared up with renewed vigor. It turns out she had loved him all these years. And my wife resumed her relationship with him again. In general, they meet all this time and she wants to start a new life, in which, alas, for me, no place. She has lived with me for 40 years, given me her best years, and now that the children are grown, she wants a fresh start with the man she loves. Saying all this, she was well aware that with every word she said, she was mercilessly killing me. For a second she reminded me of an executioner, indifferently doing his job. It was nothing personal. It's love. It happens. That's it now. You can exhale and drink. What happened next? I poured the whiskey again and drank it in a gulp. It's a strange drink. It doesn't get through at all. I just need a bigger drink. What was I really doing? Or maybe not pour it, but straight from the neck. Have you ever noticed that a bottle of good whiskey has a wide handy neck like a decanter? Very handy, I tell you. You practically don't need a glass. Nastia sat opposite me and was silent. I even worried. Maybe something happened. She spoke so well, so coherently. Good girl. All these years she'd been leading me on. If I hadn't found my discharge form, I probably wouldn't have guessed anything. A real hereditary woman. And what words? This is happening. Of course it happens, it's no big deal. It happens, that's all. I got up, kicked the stool, and went into the bedroom. Without saying a word I got dressed, threw my things into the bag, and went out. Yura. The question hung in the air. You don't have to go out for the night at all. I looked at her. Her figure stood out against the dark silhouette of the kitchen doorway. Aren't you going to tell me anything? Is she going to cry, or am I imagining it? Poor girl, so nervous. I shrugged, opened the door, and stepped out, trying not to hit the doorframe with my horns. It was quite late, and the city was trying to forget itself in an anxious sleep. The windows of the houses were barely lit, and only the streetlights were churning out dim light on the nearly deserted streets. The cell phone beeped. Nastya, worried about her husband. I pressed off, and turned off the phone. Suddenly I was filled with such a longing that I clamped my teeth on the collar of his coat, not to howl in despair. It was only now that I realized what had happened. I even shook my head, as if I could do something about the thoughts that were killing me. What to do? Where to go? The easiest way was to slam the door and walk out with my head held high. And go where? To the kids. They have enough problems as it is. I've never had a mistress, maybe I should. Only to work, like on duty. I would spend the night, and tomorrow I would make a final decision. I walked slowly past the black houses, trying not to slip on the wet fallen leaves. Hey, man, do you have a smoke? Someone shouted. I turned around and fell into the darkness. Nastya carefully removed her lover's hand lying on her chest and quietly got up from the bed. For the first time in recent times they loved each other without fear of being exposed. The woman threw on her robe and went into the kitchen. On the table was an unfinished bottle of whiskey. She would never clean up after herself. I have to do everything, she thought. And suddenly she found herself thinking of her husband all the time. Yura. Where had he gone? He didn't answer his phone. Anything might have happened. Nastya looked out the window. Autumn. Nighttime. Rain. It's strange why her heart hurts so much. P.S. The more good we do for the woman we love, the more and more she begins to despise us and look away. The bright light burst into my eyes. Finally, a man's voice said nearby. I turned my head with difficulty. Welcome back, Yuri. My boss, making no secret of his joy, stroked my hand. Did I? The words came to me with difficulty. Yes, you are in our clinic. You were taken to the emergency room last night with a head injury. You had the paperwork on you, and they called us. We picked you up and operated on you right away. The operation was successful and you are back with us. We told your children and your wife. Your son is on his way. The investigator said he'd be here in the afternoon. My wife, do I have a wife? Recent events have made my heart clench again. My wife. The door to the room creaked open. Daddy, hello. How are you? My son Paul kissed me on the cheek. You made us nervous. He carefully put a package on the bedside table. Here are the fruit, juice. We're not allowed anything else yet. Paul adjusted my blanket. Mom hasn't been able to come yet, some urgent matters. She doesn't need to come. All right, just don't worry. Looks like Pasha knew all about our breakup. I wonder what Nastya told him. What do ex-wives say in such a situation? You didn't love me, you didn't caress me, you killed the woman in me. All right, that's enough snot. The past doesn't count. 2 weeks later I was discharged. Nastya came to see me twice, but I refused to see her. The past does not count. For the first time, I rented a small apartment near the clinic where I worked and began to get used to single life. The breakup with my wife had a twofold effect on me. On the one hand, of course, the pain of betrayal, and on the other hand some are still not clear prospects. Only one thing I knew for sure, no new relationships with women. Inoculation against new relationships was tough. Then there was a divorce, and I was left not only without a wife, but without his corner. The children took a neutral stance, but it was obvious that they were more on their mother's side. Work. I began to operate again. In my work I tried to numb the pain of my soul, and I succeeded. I did not drink myself to death, as it sometimes happens with abandoned husbands. About 2 months later an old friend called me and asked to see me. Yura, do you remember a few years ago I borrowed a large sum from you? He started the conversation. I remembered that. 3 years ago Sergey borrowed a rather large sum of money from me. He was having serious problems with his business, and had no one to turn to for help. I had just sold my mother's apartment and had the money. When I gave it to my friend, I did not specify a deadline for repayment, understanding that Sergi would not be able to return the money immediately. Sergi fixed his affairs, but he was in no hurry to pay back his debt. I realized that if I asked about the debt, I would lose my friend. Even my father used to say, when you lend money to a friend, imagine that you're giving it to him as a gift. And if you value that person, don't remind him about the debt. When the time comes, he will pay it back if he can. Thank you for helping me out back then. Now I'm back on track, and my business is more than successful. Sergi continued, I invested your money in the business and so far it's paying off handsomely. He handed me a bank card. This is my debt with interest. It's 5 times what you lent me. Yes, it was very convenient. I bought a small house not far from the city and a car. I had no time to take care of the household, so I hired a helper. She was almost 15 years younger than me. She was quite a young woman who had already been married. She had lived with her ex-husband for almost 20 years. They didn't have any children because she was infertile. Her husband finally left her and moved in with someone else. A neighbor told me all this. Natasha didn't talk about it much herself. I had no plans for her. An assistant, nothing more. So almost half a year went by. One day, I was chopping wood and felt sick. I had a terrible headache and lost consciousness. I came to myself in the hospital. Natasha was sitting next to my bed. It was she who called an ambulance. When doctors arrived, she was sitting with my head on her lap. I was fine. Craniocerebral injuries just don't go away that easily. But after that incident, I began to look at Natasha with different eyes, and only now I realized what a beautiful woman she is. Somehow our relationship naturally evolved into intimacy, and at one point I asked her to marry me. We got married in the fall. I knew we couldn't have children, so I felt free to make love to her. About 3 months after our wedding, Natasha felt bad. Vomiting, headaches. I immediately took her to my clinic. Imagine my surprise and hers when we found out that she had been pregnant for almost 2 months. I remember Natasha told me at the time, no matter what you say, I'm keeping the baby. I just held her tightly to me and kissed her dear eyes. Just then I realized the truth. If fate closes one door in front of us, it immediately opens another. In general, life was getting better. And then one day, just before the new year, I received a phone call from Nastya. We need to meet. In a sort of pathetic, begging voice she uttered, I made a reservation at a restaurant. Please come by 7 p.m. I beg you. Nastya was sitting in front of me, looking humbled and remorseful. Yura, forgive me. There wasn't a single day that I didn't think about you. Her eyes began to fill with tears. I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family, our children. She continued to speak, and I stared silently at my once madly loved woman. The woman I would not hesitate to give my life for. The woman who, without hesitation, had twice cynically betrayed me. The woman who lied to me for nearly 20 years. The woman who cut me out of her life and left me for another man. And now she had suddenly come to her senses and was trying to get back to me. Nastya kept saying that her time without me made her realize how much she loved me, that she only now understood that I was the only real man in her life. For some reason she reminded me of the siren from Greek mythology. Her words lingered, lulled me into a fantasy that only I owned her heart. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. She repeated the word like a spell, and I looked at her brightly painted lipstick mouth, which delighted my ears with such sweet words, and I imagined her kissing and caressing her lover with it. Did she really think I would believe her words? That she was confused, that she didn't know what she wanted, that this woman who cheated on me, had a child with her lover, left me and spent her free time with another man and never thought of me, came back because it turns out she only loved me. In her own time she found an excuse for her meanness and left me without hesitation. She had fully enjoyed her sensual pleasures with her lover more than once in his bed, and she had coldly planned the moment to give me one last death blow. And now she was here to offer me the only precious thing she had left, but it was already being used by her lover. She realized that he only wanted her for fun and as long as she had money, that she could have no future with him, that there was no one to provide for her now. After realizing all this, she came crawling to me, hoping to try to get back what she had lost. Oh, my God. Do I seem so stupid to her, ready to believe all her lies? I listened in silence to her remorse-filled monologue. I had nothing to say to her. You know, I didn't revel in her humiliation or gloat. I even felt pity for her in some way, as a human being. After all, we had been together for 40 years. but our meeting had to come to an end. And at that moment my phone rang. Natasha called and asked where to come and get me. I gave her the address and said goodbye. "Is this your woman?" Nastya asked me quietly and looked at me with eyes full of tears. "Yes." "And how long have you been together?" "For about a year and a half now." "It happens." I got up. "Goodbye, Nastya. Try to be happy." When I left the restaurant, I turned around. Nastya was standing with her hands clasped to her chest, looking at me through the festively decorated window. All around me people were bustling and hurrying somewhere. Life was going on. I got in my car and turned the ignition key. The engine rumbled smoothly and quietly. I turned left and, in a few seconds, joined the stream of rushing cars.